Hey kids, that was an interesting play that the girls just put on, and it's interesting. I bet if we were at Rhineland in the sanctuary and I asked the question, if I asked you to answer what you just saw in that play in two sentences, I bet you would all come up with different answers for what you would want to talk about in terms of what you saw. Maybe some of you would focus on the fact that that camera was stolen by that little brown critter that Adelia had. Maybe some of you are like all focused on, why that bear has a cape. Maybe there's other things that you would note as well that it's just like, man, that's a very interesting detail that I want to talk more about. And, we could say all those different things, and each of those different things would be true because we all witnessed the same event, so long as we were telling the truth about it, right? Now, what about if we were all alive and saw Jesus here on the earth, okay, working and doing his ministry and, all the different things that, he did and the people saw him do, and all the things that he said, all the things that he taught. For 3 years we saw that, right? Now, all the things that Jesus said and did and all those different types of things, we could hardly put those into a 1,000-page book, let alone, a couple dozen pages in the Bible, right? And the writers of the Gospels, they did that, right? They recorded the different things that eyewitnesses saw, and they tell us about who Jesus is. And I bet you all know all 4 of the names of the Gospels, right? Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, right? And it's interesting because, these are what the Gospel writers, or these are the things that Gospel writers did for us. They wrote down these eyewitness accounts of everything that they wanted to tell us about what Jesus said and did. They talk about his life. They tell about his birth. They tell about the ministry that he did, and also his death and his resurrection for us, for our sins, right? And this is what our Bible verse that we've memorized this week tells us about, right? This is Paul basically summarizing everything that the Gospels tell us, right? This is what 1 Corinthians 15 verses 3 and 4 says. For I delivered to you first of all that which I also received. The things that Paul had heard, right? That Christ died for our sins according to the Scriptures, and that he was buried, and that he rose again on the 3rd day according to the Scriptures. Okay? Now it's interesting that these gospel writers are recording the events of the things that people actually saw Jesus do, right? Actually heard him say. And it's interesting because all of the Gospels, tell that same story, those same events in different ways, and they focus on different things, right? You even like the Gospels that are very close together, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, that tell basically the same events in their own different ways. Each of them has a little bit of details that maybe the other one didn't include because they want to tell it in their own words. And this is actually really important because, if people, in maybe like a court or when they're telling about an event to a policeman, when you've got eyewitnesses, it's important that they actually tell what happened in their own words. Because if you've got a bunch of different witnesses that say the things that happened in exactly the same words, it might be covering up something that actually didn't happen, and they're trying to tell a lie. But we don't have that, right? We don't have what some people who don't want to follow Jesus would say. Okay, we see that there's some that don't want to follow Jesus, who would say that, all these different things that the gospel writers are telling us are myths. And myths are basically tall tales, okay? Things that, maybe might have happened at some point in the time in the past, but, there's nobody alive that could actually tell us that that is actually what happened. That's how long that they've been exaggerated for, and all those different types of things. Okay, but and we kind of do this, but often we're caught when we're exaggerating, right? So maybe, like, for instance, your dad takes you out fishing, and you come back and you tell your friends, I caught 1,000 fish this weekend when I went out fishing. And your dad overhears this and he says, no, tell the truth, you caught 5, right? It's interesting, like these people that say that Jesus didn't actually do these things aren't actually understanding the context, the time when these Gospels were written. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John all write when there's other people who saw Jesus say and do these things actually alive, to say that, yes, that is also what we saw too. That is what we heard Jesus say. And so all of these Gospels, all 4 of them, are actually recording things that Jesus actually said and did. And they want to tell these things with their own purpose, their own focus. And when we understand those different purposes and focuses that the gospel writers have, it helps us understand the story about who they're telling Jesus to be a lot better. Okay, so let's maybe summarize the focus of what each of the gospel writers is trying to tell us in their gospel. So Matthew, he was a Jew, okay, and so he cared a lot about what the Old Testament said that Jesus would ultimately be. Okay, and so he wanted his readers to recognize that Jesus was that promised king that was foretold in the Old Testament, okay? That he was this promised Messiah who would not only come to set up the kingdom, but also fulfill what God had commanded in the law and the prophets, okay? And so we can see this, especially in Matthew chapter 5, verse 17, where you can read about Jesus saying, I've not come to destroy the law, but I've come to fulfill it. Okay? Mark, he records about what he heard from another eyewitness. Okay, he's recording what Peter, one of the other disciples, told about Jesus. Okay, and Mark wants his readers to hear about Jesus's power and authority, and that he came to serve and sacrifice himself for the sake of others. And we see that especially in Mark chapter 10, verse 45. Luke was a very smart guy, and he liked details, okay? He was a historian and a doctor. And so he focused a lot on how Jesus came, and he was fully man, okay? And he still is fully man. And he records all these different details about the different miracles that Jesus did, and especially his death on the cross, okay? Trying to show that he is fully man. And Luke chapter 19, verse 10 is a good verse to see that, okay? John was one of the disciples who was very close to Jesus. He also wrote several years after these other writers, okay? And so he had opportunity likely to read these other things, talk with them about the different things that they were writing in their Gospels. And so he focused on other aspects that he figured we needed to know, okay? He focused, he spent a lot of time really focusing on the fact that Jesus is fully God. And we see this time and time again, that God came to be with us in the midst of John. And so we see this especially in John chapter 20, verse 31, if you want to go look that up, okay? So let's recap so we can remember all of these different things, so that when you go read the Gospels, you can remember these things and allow them to help you to read it better, okay? We see that the Gospel writers are writing eyewitness accounts about what Jesus did and said. And these are things that people actually saw and heard Jesus do. Okay? We also see that the Gospels tell of Jesus' birth, his life, his teaching, his death, and resurrection. Okay? And they do so in their own ways, for their own purposes, because they're telling that story so that we can better understand who Jesus is. And so as we read through each gospel, we are looking for what Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John are wanting to teach us about who Jesus is and what he did. Okay? So I hope that you have a good time this week and that you're well and that you spend time reading the Gospels and learning about who Jesus is. Okay? Have a great week. We'll see you later.